Kings, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. We're talking about Unit 1, Topic 3 today, Government Power and Individual Rights. So basically, today's lesson is just going to focus on the differences between Federalist Number 10, written by James Madison, and Brutus 1. So we're going to want to explain how Federalist and Anti-Federalist views on central government and democracy are reflected in the U.S. foundational documents. So let's talk about what those views are between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists, important thing to know about them is that they favored a strong central government. They wanted a stronger national government to help keep the states together, to help deal with any kind of disputes or foreign issues on that front. They favored a large republic. They also supported the new U.S. Constitution. So they basically wrote those essays to defend the document, to explain why it should be our form of government, and to basically quell any of the fears that the other people had as far as when they were deciding on to approve this document or not. Because remember, when they wrote the Constitution, it didn't go into effect right away. It then had to go back to the states for formal approval, basically, and the states were able to vote on it and either approve yes or say no, we want to keep our old system of government. So the Federalists favored the stronger federal or national government. So they wanted to ratify the new U.S. Constitution because that supported the strong national government to take some power away from the states. They didn't want to take total power away from the states, but they definitely recognize there's some things that maybe the national government can control, just give us some kind of uniformity, basically. They thought the checks and the balances would protect people's rights, that we didn't actually need a Bill of Rights. And they basically wanted a strong executive. They wanted a strong executive branch, a strong president to help settle disputes, settle debates, and especially lead us in times of war or crisis. Anti-Federalists were basically the opposite. They favored strong state governments. They wanted the states to be more powerful than the national government. They didn't trust a national government. They were afraid of being oppressed or dealing with tyranny. They opposed ratification of the new U.S. Constitution, so they were very much against approving the Constitution because they feared that it would basically lead to domination over the states, and they basically feared that it was going to be similar to the tyranny that they lived under the king in Great Britain not that long ago. They feared a strong central government would basically render the states powerless. And they also demanded a Bill of Rights. They said, if you look at the original Constitution, there's nothing in there to guarantee individual liberties, to guarantee individual rights. So they basically were very fearful that this national government would be able to take over, take people's guns, take people's speech away, and make them follow a religion that they didn't want to follow. So there were lots of fears because there weren't individual guarantees that we have now in our Bill of Rights. Their arguments were basically that they wanted the stronger state governments. They liked the system under the Articles of Confederation. They felt that system worked just great, basically. And not just great, maybe, but basically it could be improved, but that they didn't want to totally revamp the whole system and do a whole new system of government that the Constitution called for. They said that most power should stay with the states. They didn't want to give up too much power to the federal government. Again, there's lots of fear around that. They refused to ratify without a Bill of Rights. They also were very fearful of a national bank basically taking over their economies, their state economies. So main difference, the Federalists wanted the new U.S. Constitution. The Anti-Federalists was like, no, let's just fix the system we have. Let's not go ahead and write the whole new thing. So Federalist Paper number 10 is basically, this is written by James Madison, and it explains how to guard against factions and advocates for a large republic. So that's the main takeaway from Fed 10. I asked students to read some excerpts, so go ahead and look in Google Classroom if you haven't done this already, but go into Google Classroom, find the excerpts, and then find the questions. So in an assignment, it says Federalist 10 questions and Brutus 1 questions, and then there's one that says excerpts. So find the excerpts, read those, and then answer those questions, basically. We answered those in class, but if there's any specific questions you didn't know or you need the help answering, just please feel free to send me an email, or you can comment in the comments down below. So first of all, just really briefly, what's a faction? Faction really just means like a group of people from a larger group, basically. But Madison is more specific in his definition of factions, and he basically defines it as a number of citizens. It could be a minority or majority, so it could be a small group of people or a large group of people who are united by some common impulse of passion that's against the rights of other citizens or against the permanent or total interests of the community. So Madison sees factions as a problem, actually, because he says these are groups of people that are wanting to threaten the rights of the minority or basically do things that are maybe bad for society as a whole. He identifies like one of the most causes of factions, or one of the most durable sources of factions, as he says, is our diversity of opinion in political life. Basically that we have rich and poor people He says the most common durable source of factions has been the various unequal distribution of property, and that those who hold property and without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. And that's definitely still a problem that we deal with today, as far as the wealth gap or wealth inequities between rich and poor people. They don't have the same interests in our society. And so that does lead to some conflict for sure. So Madison basically says, okay, factions are a problem because they're trying to take away other people's rights. We don't like that. So what's the cure then? He said there's two solutions. You can remove the causes or you can control the effects. But he basically goes on to saying removing the causes is a really bad idea. And the reason for that basically is because then you would have to destroy all liberty. You would have to take all agency and choice away from people and take their freedoms away. And that's not what they're looking to do with the Constitution. So right away he says removing the causes, it might remove the cause of faction, but it's not going to be how we want to run our society. So he basically says then what we have to do is control the effects, basically. Control the effects of factions or find ways to guard against them, basically. So some more questions on Fed 10. Basically, he talks about, I asked you, is it possible to create a homogeneous society where everyone thinks alike? And would you want to live in that society? Talked about what issues divided mankind in 1787. Ones that we identified in class were basically slavery. And do we still deal with the effects of slavery? Definitely we do today. And then also the fact that there's rich and poor people and they have different interests in society. That was true in 1787 and it's true in 2020 also. And so Madison basically talks about, okay, we want to control the effects of factions. So then what's best? Should we have a republic or should we have a pure or direct democracy? A pure democracy meaning where everybody votes on everything directly. But he says that's a danger to individual rights because then you can have mob rule essentially, or the majority can take away rights from the minority groups. And so he says a pure democracy can actually admit no cure for the mischiefs of faction because there's nothing to check them. Basically, there's nothing to stop them from basically threatening people's property, threatening people's rights. And basically he says that if we look back in history, we've seen that these pure and direct democracies basically don't lead to solving problems and they just lead to more problems. So he basically comes to the conclusion that we need a republic, we need a representative democracy where people elect their leaders, and that's going to guard against just mob rule, basically. And then he comes to the question, like, should we have a small republic, a bunch of small republics, like just all the states with their own republics, or should we have a large republic like what we live in today? So by large republic, he's referring to the geographic size. And he says that it's better because you're going to have more people to choose from, so more fit characters, as he says, or better people who might be more competent to serve in government. And he also says that it's going to make it a larger group make it difficult to basically trick people or get people to vote for someone who's going to take away your rights. And he basically just says that the large republic, if something's going to happen as far as a faction is going to take over a small area in a large republic, it'll be difficult for them to take over the group as a whole, basically. So like, for example, if we saw somebody's rights being taken away in Georgia or Alabama, that we would be like to California to try to put a stop to that because we would say, well, that's not right what's happening to them. But that if those individual republics were on their own, that maybe we wouldn't have a connection or a feeling to try to stop that kind of tyranny that could be happening among the states. So the main concerns, Madison wrote this to explain how the new U.S. Constitution and Republican form of federal government would have greater stability than the Articles of Confederation. It also explained how the system would protect against the competing factions by drowning out the rights of the minorities and the public good. And just explained basically, how this is going to protect against mob rule, basically. So main ideas, factions are inevitable. Basically, Madison comes to conclusions like factions are going to happen. People are going to group up. It's just kind of how human nature works. So we don't want to remove the causes because that would just take away liberty. We don't want that. So what's the best guard for protecting against factions and protecting minority rights would be basically a large republic, that they are superior for controlling the negative effects of factions, as opposed to basically having just smaller republics like all the states basically being on their own and running their own territories completely. He also said that if there's less people who control the majority, then they can easily oppress others, basically. So you want more people in control of the majority as possible. So I've got some YouTube videos on Federalist number 10. I've got mine in the top right corner and some other ones. Go back into the lecture and check those out. They're really good at just reviewing this document and what Madison's ideas were. Brutus number 1 is the counter argument. So Madison is advocating for the Constitution and advocating for why we need it and also why this Constitution and the large republic will protect against factions. Brutus is basically arguing against the Constitution. Remember, anti-federalists didn't want the Constitution. They feared that the federal government would eliminate the state and local authority. They would oppress the citizens. It would just basically be tyranny in the states. So Brutus is arguing the opposite. While Madison said, let's have a large republic, Brutus is saying, no, you're going to get lost in that large republic. You think that small republics are best to represent the people. Or Brutus wants small democracies, essentially. Because he said, a free republic over such a vast extent of territory is impracticable. Just in the sense that basically people are going to lose confidence and control over their government, or people aren't going to feel well represented in that government. So Brutus number 1 is our only anti-federalist paper that we look at, and it's basically written, again, to oppose ratification. So Brutus is basically talking about all the problems with the Constitution and why we shouldn't approve it. He's basically talking about his fears about the Constitution and why we shouldn't have it. So just in the same assignment, you'll see Brutus 1 questions there, where I'll be asking you about the anti-federalists and what they believed. Also, I had students try to understand what the necessary and proper clause and what the supremacy clause were. Those were things that Brutus talked about specifically as being he was fearful of. If you're not familiar, the necessary and proper clause is part of the Constitution that allows the Congress to pass additional laws that aren't directly stated in the Constitution. And we're going to look more at this next week when we look at some Supreme case that involved this clause. But basically, it allows them to pass additional laws not directly stated in the Constitution. And Brutus was fearful of that because he said, look, this is basically a blank check for them to write whatever laws that they want to. And so Brutus is like, I don't like this necessary and proper clause. You're saying you're limiting the power of the federal government, but look at this line right here. This says that basically they have unlimited power. And that made him very fearful. And then what is the supremacy clause? That's basically what says the Constitution and the laws of the federal government are supreme over the states. Brutus was very fearful of that because he basically said, again, this is going to make the states powerless. He really felt like this was basically a stepping stone to getting rid of the states. Or maybe we would have states in name, but they wouldn't have any authority or power or control over the people within their states. So the main arguments against ratification, they basically, the anti-federalists said that we should have a confederacy, that we don't want a large republic, we don't want a large central government. That the Constitution would make the federal government too large, it would weaken the state governments. Also didn't approve of the direct taxation. He was afraid that the Supreme Court would swallow up the lower courts and render them powerless, and that the necessary and proper clause would give the government too much power. Also, that the well-being of the public is sacrificed because basically we don't know how to, the interests of the people. How do we make sure that their needs are being met, essentially? So other concerns that Brutus worried about was just basically, this necessary and proper clause here, this power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing power. And so he concludes basically, even though this have to be connected to other powers, he's saying this is going to be a blank check and that eventually the states are going to be eliminated through this. So more questions on Brutus 1, go ahead and take a look at those, read the excerpts, let me know if you have questions. A lot of these are opinion-based questions. So it's a yes or no, or it's, for number 6, do they unite or divide us, our diversity among the states? And really there's no right answer, but please provide your evidence and your causation for why you believe what you believe. Brutus basically, again, was just worried about one consolidated national government as basically taking over the states, and that you're basically not going to be represented with this large republic. And in other words, it's impossible to create a set of national laws. We're a diverse country. We've got too many diverse interests, and we're different cultures, different economies. He basically says we're too divided. And he's even talking back then, you got to remember too, he's talking about, America at the time is really just the East Coast without even Florida. So he's saying even back then we're too divided. So I think even right now, he would say, wow, we're even more divided just because there's so many different states. We've got 50 different states with all our different interests and all that kinds of stuff. So go ahead, I recommend you take a look at both of these videos to just review the arguments of Brutus and basically what his reasons were for opposing the Constitution and being fearful of this federal or national government basically swallowing up the power of the states. The one on the right is my video, and the one on the left is just another video from a different teacher. So let's review the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. They had, different views on what the government should look like. Federalists said stronger national governments. Anti-Federalists said stronger state governments. The big thing that the Anti-Federalists wanted, though, was a Bill of Rights, and they did get that demand met. Eventually, the Federalists said, okay, fine, we'll approve. If you approve the Constitution, then we will include a Bill of Rights as our first action of Congress, basically. And that's what they did. So even though the Bill of Rights wasn't in the original Constitution, it was added there shortly after, basically. So the Anti-Federalists at least got some of those protections and guarantees that they were looking for, basically. So I got a practice question on here. You probably won't be able to read it on the YouTube channel, but I recommend that you go back and take a look at that and put in the correct answer. Basically, two of these answers are flipped. One of these answers, part of the answer is correct, but the other answer is wrong. And then another answer is fully right because both sides do represent both sides and what they actually believed. So just to review, the Federalists, again, stronger national government, like the Constitution. And the Anti-Federalists favored stronger state governments, opposed ratification, and they really feared that the strong central government would take away all their power and basically mean that they wouldn't be well represented in that large republic, essentially. So those are the main arguments of the two sides. It's important that you know especially how they felt about the size of the national government. Federalists said nice and big and strong. Anti-Federalists said small. And then the Federalists wanted the Constitution. They liked this document. Anti-Federalists said, no, 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 we don't like this. Let's revise the articles. Let's not start anew because there's all kinds of problems that could be created with this Constitution. Okay, everybody, so that's it for this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I was able to answer some of your questions on the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. If you have more, or if you need more clarification or help on that specific assignment, please let me know. You can comment below. You can send me an email or send me a text if you're on my remind. I do really appreciate you for watching this video and just reinforcing your understanding on these topics. I think you can subscribe over here, and I think you can click on some other videos over here. I always forget how YouTube does this. But the most important thing, Vikings, is that you have a great day. All right? Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it.